All right. So the first thing I did was actually found a base wood material that had like a pattern in it, which I liked. You guys could either do that. You guys could also find, like I went to there's a website called textures.com. And that actually that wood varnish confessional tutorial, he like uses like an albedo map from textures.com as his base, and he starts to create a bunch of different texture maps out of it. But I actually downloaded this one right here. So this is like a teak wood oak veneer teak material. So, we're going to make it more advanced, but this just gives me something I can work with, right? So it has like a nice pattern on it. I'm just going to change, and I'm not really going to do anything besides color on this one. So we are going to change the tiling on it, right? So something that makes sense in terms of scale. So again, on this project, really please pay attention to the scale of your assets. Make sure you guys go back and look at your references and make sure the wood grain and the details you guys create feels like it's the right size. So yeah, I did that, or you could do that. I did just one of these ones of wood rough just because it had a pattern that I liked. It's kind of up to you guys how you want to start it. You guys can make them out of the stencils that Jeff has. You guys can create them, like I said, from an albedo texture map that you find online. Yeah. Or you can do it in Substance Designer. Yeah.
I did about this one.
What's it?
But like, I didn't have to come with the other project. With grain, scale value. Because I got to get to the point where when you're spin,
right. Yeah. And so the difficulty there is also different even types of wood at the same scale are going to have different grain patterns and scales. So sometimes it's like adjusting the color and scaling the pattern just to make it feel right. A lot of it's also intuition, right? There's like certain woods that are kind of bizarre, like I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there's like a lot of very weird woods that aren't commonly used for furniture just because it's more exotic. But if you have the right properties and you have the right details on top of it, it can feel believable, I think. So wood grain is challenging. I think for the most part, I would say you just don't want it to feel like your asset's miniature. Like if you zoom out and you have perspective on, you look at it and your asset feels like, yeah, it feels like it could be a toy, right? Like if my wood grain was something like this, even then something like this kind of feels wrong. It feels like way too large, and it starts to give my door like a bit of a toy-like appearance, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't have a really solid answer for you, but yeah, I think to some degree you can kind of fudge it. I think you guys will be fine for the most part. Also, the details you guys put on top will also affect sense of scale too, right? Like if you have really large stains and wears that don't feel like appropriate to the scale and you're missing a lot of like really small details, then it can still feel, even if the wood grain's right, still feel like a miniature object, right? Because the textures are just too big. Cool. So what I did was I went ahead and created like a wood grain like this. What I did next is I created a roughness fill layer. So I'll come over here and it's just going to be roughness. And down here on my original color, I'm actually going to use my color to drive my roughness and my height, but I'm going to use them kind of separately. An alternative is if you brought this texture map into like another program, like in Photoshop, you could use things like color select to actually grab certain color details, which will give you very specific parts of the wood grain, which is really cool. And then you can import those out as black and white maps into Substance Painter, which gives you a ton of versatility. I'm not going to do that because of time constraints, but that will give you a ton of versatility. So if you guys want to do that, I recommend doing it. So anyways, so what I'm going to do is on this fill layer, this one's going to be just roughness. Down here, we need to reference this, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add an anchor point. So we're just going to right click it, add anchor point. So now I'm referencing just this whole layer, everything in it. And up here, we're going to go ahead and establish, like, we're going to make the grain a little bit glossier. So it's just going to be, has a slightly different hit to it. Actually, it'll be slightly rougher. We'll be rougher. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a black mask, add a fill, like typical. All right, so now I want to just target only those wood grain patterns. So yeah, I think this done. Okay, that's good. I was checking if it's perfectly tiled or not. So I'm going to take a look at this. We're going to load in that anchor point, so that layer, and you can see I'm grabbing the color map. Right, there's nothing in roughness, nothing in height. I want to make sure I'm grabbing the color map. It's changing it black and white, of course. I'm going to levels adjust it so I have like a higher range of black and white values, right? Or a more dynamic range of black and white values, right? Because right now it's all just kind of too dark. So I'm just going to do something like that. Maybe I might want something that has some grayscale value to it, so I might not go too far. So what can be kind of cool is we talked about, do you guys remember the gradient node? Yeah. Okay. So the gradient node like takes your image and then you can remap the values or colors to different types of colors based on the black and white or based on a gradient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a gradient node to this. So we're going to go ahead and add a filter gradient. I keep calling them nodes, but you know what I mean. Gradient filter. So I'm going to add a gradient filter. And to isolate this, essentially what I want to do is see if I remember to bring my yes. No. I thought I had remembered to put my markers. That's so sad. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use this. This is really hard to explain, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set this top one to black and this middle one to white. So by doing this, what I can do is by adjusting this, it's like, imagine like a black and white linear gradient, right? Black on both sides and white in the middle. I can shift the white to essentially grab part of my image, right? So if I push that white, so let's bring the black up and push the white closer to the higher end, right? I'm going to be grabbing the lightest values and only the lightest values, right? If I push it down lower, like down here, like right there, and then I bring this value down here, then I'm going to be grabbing darker values, but not the black values, right? So the reason why I'm doing this instead of just using a levels adjustment is a levels adjustment is essentially going to let you only, you choose a value, and on one side of that value is white and one side of that value is black. So you can't really isolate very easily, right? You can isolate like the tops and bottoms really easily. Like you can isolate the black values, you can isolate the white values from all the gray values, but getting the midtone values and isolating them from everything else and using just those as a mask is kind of hard. So this is like a way that you guys could use it. I'm using a black and white gradient where it's black on both ends and white on another one. And I'm just trying to choose the middle values to turn into a black and white mask. Does that make sense? It's really weird to describe out loud, and it does not help that Substance Painter has such a garbage presentation of these settings. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm just setting like the top and lower bounds of this mask, and I'm just, you know, trying to grab certain details. So anyways, I'm not going to fiddle around with this too much, but that's going to give me, or let me target specific parts of the mask. So you can see I'm actually just grabbing like the values that are at the edge of this. So it's between, like if I hide this, right, it's between the lighter areas and darker areas. I'm grabbing like the areas in between, right? It's not exactly what I want. I'm probably going to do something more like this. So, oh, actually I need to invert this. So we'll do it like this. So we'll go ahead and do, oh my God, this is hard to do in front of you guys. You guys are making me nervous. So I would do that, and then I would maybe add like a little filter blur because this image is it's starting to get a little low res. So we're just going to bring a little bit of a blur to that. And then we could use a levels node to clamp it again. So anyways, that would let me like isolate. You can see I'm just isolating that wood grain, and I can change the color. I can add more depth. I can do all kinds of different things. In this case, I just added some roughness. And if I wanted to add some height, I can just grab the height and push it down a little bit. This would be a better example if I had greater grayscale depth in this wood, but this wood is actually pretty uniform. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and turn off those and go to the actual stuff I used. Because I didn't do that actually for my base wood. I will tell you guys right now, my base wood is kind of confusing because what I did was it happens when you start adding like a complex layer stack and you want to go back down and then tweak things down here, is that if you go look at those in isolation, they don't make sense because you edit them in relation to all the things above them. So I started out with this wood rough material, right? You can see I exaggerated the details a lot. I played a lot with, so we'll just take a look at this, right? I played a lot with the values, add a lot of the variation because I was going to add a lot of levels on top. Something I recommend sometimes is if you guys bring in, so here, let me go ahead and bring this, bring a raw one in first. So let's just turn that one off. So this is what it looks like by default. So you can see I really screwed it up. But okay, here's a pro tip for all of you guys, all you chuckleheads who are doing is chucklehead like a bad word? Sounds fun. What's the first thing that you guys notice is wrong with this? Right, why does it need to be rotated? Exactly. So anytime you guys are, well, for one, almost every piece of wood, complex wood, anything is made of a bunch of different pieces of wood, right? Not just one piece of wood. The second thing is whenever you're going to cut a piece of wood, think of a tree. The tree is really, really long in one direction and not very long in another direction. So almost always the grain is, they're going to favor cutting long pieces with the grain, right? So you're going to make the cuts against the grain, but the length is going to be with the grain. So always make sure you guys do that. That I've seen that all the time. So exactly what Marshall said. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this 90. What I might do too is I might change these down here, but for the most part, I didn't want to bother with that. But what I could do is make a second layer and just mask out this area and rotate it if I wanted to go up. Like if I wanted to feel like it's part of this main door, but it's not. Okay, so the reason why I wanted to show this is when you bring over these maps or these materials from over here, you can go ahead and use like an adjustment layer. So you can just add like a levels node and I can go to height, right? And then like, let's say I didn't want it to go so deep, right? And push out so far. So I can just like limit the range of the height details, right? And I can play around with it with a levels node, gives you more control than just turning the opacity. The other thing you could do too is if you don't really want to go too crazy on it and add a bunch of extra layers on it, there's almost always this like technical parameters part right here where it will actually let you adjust some things. So I do this a lot of times, especially when there's normals information, because normals information is hard to edit. You can see in this case, it doesn't have normals information, but they'll have something like this right here, normals intensity. And so that's a good way of dialing it back. So height range is usually where it's kind of like what I was just doing with the levels node, is we're just going to go ahead and pull back height range. There we go. And so that's just compressing how deep and how far out it goes away from middle. So that's something if you ever use like a preset material, that's almost always like a great way to kind of like dial in the values. You can do hue shift and contrast and stuff like that, but usually that's better to be handled either because a lot of them, they'll have like these settings in here. It's either better to use them with these settings or to just use like blending modes and things like that. So anyways, I spent a lot of time just playing with the roughness and you can see I like really amped it up and a lot of the stuff I did afterwards, but I really cranked up the wood color saturation, vein color saturation, and veins density. And that's what's giving me this like wild variation between those colors. I chose this color, which gave me a really funky color to work with. And yeah, so I'm not going to go too much into making this one right here. So let's get rid of this one. Oh. All right. So then the next thing I did was I added some deeper grains. So I called it darker grains, but really the color isn't that much deeper. So let's take a look at it in the color channel, right? So you can see I added just a little bit more grain information. So just adding an extra layer. And it has just a little bit of height so you guys can see it pushes in, right? A little bit. And then what I did was I did a grain adjustment. So the grain adjustment is essentially just, let's see if what we look at in the height channel. Okay, never mind. So let's go back to the base color. All right, so in this case, it was just to dial down the color and roughness, right? Because I think everything was just getting too much for me, right? So I just kind of did an overlay for it. So I just dialed it back a little bit. So that's why I was trying to show you guys, like, and I would recommend you guys look at some of the references for building a base layer is because I did it kind of, the way that you kind of do it for the first time, right? Where you're just kind of building up layers and then you go backwards and like make adjustments. And so you get kind of a complicated layer stack and you'll see me. And if you go and watch some of Jeff's videos too, he'll be like, and I don't know what this layer does. So we can delete it. Yeah.
What mask do you use for dark green?
Oh, that's a great question. Dark green. Oh, okay. So, this one's one that I actually found in here. If you just go in here and type wood, there is a wood generator right here, which is awesome. So, and I just warped it a couple times, but what I'll do is we'll just go ahead and add a fill. I just put that in there. Again, just rotate it 90 degrees. So if you wanted to build your own wood, you could also use this one. This one's awesome. The great thing about this one, one of my favorite things, is it has gradient on the wood grain, right? So you can see the wood grain goes from black to white as a gradient instead of just singular black and white, which is really nice because then you can use, this is an excellent example of like, let's tile this a little bit. So we're going to tile it a little bit. That's too much. I'm going to turn down how many knots there are. So almost 0. Hardness, yeah, hardness is fine. And then, so we have this like gradient structure to it. So this would be one where if I added that filter and added gradient, and then just set this to black and set this one to white, then I could go ahead and select different parts of that grain. And so you can build up like these kind of multi-layered grain effect, which is pretty cool. And it gives you a lot of like complexity, so you can build multiple colors in it. But some of those other tutorials go over that kind of workflow if that's something you guys want to do. Do you have a question, Madeline? That's a great question. I have a varnish layer up above, and we'll take a look at that for sure. But that's a great question. All I did in here was just apply 2 levels of warp just to make it, kind of funky. And then I was calling this somewhere else, so I made sure I made an anchor point. For the grains adjust, this one's just using the original grain. So I'm just taking the original grain and I'm just making it so I'm like adjusting certain values, but I'm leaving other colors and values behind, right? Because if I didn't do that, you can see I was playing with the adjustment of it. I wanted some of the color variation to show through, so I was just using the original grains to drive this mask. So I was just anchor pointed. Let's get rid of all these things down here so they don't confuse anybody. So I was just anchor pointing my base layer. Let's call it base layer. And then I just was using that inside here to make that adjustment. So I was just overlaying color and roughness just to cover it up a little bit. All right, next thing I did was I started implementing in some bigger cracks and crevices. So I went ahead and did, oh wait, never mind, sorry, I got confused. So first thing I did was I went ahead and roughened some of the grain. So I was using some original, sorry. I mean, this got to be such a beast that I went through and tried to clean it up to make it make sense for you guys and delete old things that I didn't like, but I didn't get everything. So in this case, what I did was I was trying to make a lot of the crevices, the deeper parts, rougher. So I did do that with the grain, right? So a lot of the grain, like the grain shapes, like the deeper ones. So you can see there's like a bit of a specular difference. It's kind of hard to tell, and I enhance it above in some of those deeper areas. So you can see like this deep area right here, that little dark brown kind of picks up a lot of roughness now. See, I'm like doing things and then undoing them a lot with my layers. It was kind of messy. But so that was just using, I have like another fill layer in here. So I was just using, again, grabbing the wood rough and then making a levels adjustment and a lot of the stuff, what I'll do is I'll be adjusting that like this levels adjustment on it out here, right? I'll be like, ooh, I like that. Ooh, I don't like that. So a lot of it's just like playing around with it and just seeing what values you want to get. And a reminder with the levels adjustment, the top part is the input, the bottom part's output. All you really know for the input is if you bring the black and white closer, it increases your contrast or value range. And then moving the gray favors brighter or darker values. And then you use the bottom part if you want to cap off or prevent it from going below or above a certain value. So just a reminder, this is just every time you do a fill node, it has the levels built into it. So you don't have to put a levels right after it. Sometimes I ignore that. Sometimes I do it, whatever. Okay. Next thing I did is this one's super subtle. And I know I turned this one down quite a bit initially, but let's see what it looks like. Yeah, so it's at 19%, but I had it originally at 100%. So what I was doing here was I was grabbing the raised value areas, the raised parts of the grain, and I wanted those to be glossier, right? Because I kind of want like the raised areas to be the parts that are like polished or touched more often or picked up varnish. And then the depressed areas are the areas that have, like that it's either deeper or torn away or has more texture to it. So it gets rougher. And so again, in that case, I was just taking that same wood roughness. I can use that same map multiple times, right? I'm just using those levels adjustments to grab different parts of that texture map in order to target different grain, right? So, and this one, I was trying to grab all the non-dark areas and push a little bit more gloss into them. Okay, so this part right here, I'll admit, might seem kind of confusing just because I did take a pretty non-linear approach to this. But as we get higher up, things get a little bit more linear and straightforward. So hopefully, if you guys want to apply the other stuff to your thing, in this part, how I made this is kind of weird, totally understandable. So the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to add like a bit of a height push. So in this case, I did a push, but I meant to push down. Okay, sorry. I'm getting so confused by my own stuff. So okay, no, I did it right. So I'm doing this push up where you see the results, which is the grain stays behind. But in here, I'm using that. So I grab my original grain and then I overlay that darker grain that I have because I also want to get that to be affecting it. Because I didn't do that at first. I was just pushing up the original grain. Ooh, that was gross. But by just pushing up the original grain in the first place, it started to look a little too, what's it called? It looked like the darker grain wasn't being affected at all. So, and then what I did to clamp it, right? Because when I bring it up, you can see this is way too noisy and crunchy because there's so much detail in there. I could either blur it or do something like that. But what I decided to do is I went ahead and used a minimum, right? We talked about min max, right? Filling from below or filling from above, right? And so min darken is always going to be like a polishing. It's going to come from above and chop off the top layer. And so what you get is this flattening kind of smoothing effect on raised areas. So I set this to max. Sorry, min, darken min. And then let's go ahead and turn it on. And you'll see as I bring this value darker, right, I'm like polishing up off the higher areas. So that gave me a little bit of like this kind of polished over time effect, right? I mean, obviously the wood wasn't this crunchy in the first place, like when it was raw, but this kind of gives it this like softening kind of effect, which is nice. But I left, again, I was coming back to all these layers and dialing them in based on other layers I did later on. So I call this one surface push up because it's just kind of, I wanted to push up the surface, but then also polish it down. So on this one right here, I was just doing a really big old height adjustment. Oops. Oh, wait, yeah, right here, height adjustment. So this is just a pass-through layer. If we go over to the height channel, you guys can see it has pass-through. And I'm doing the same thing where I'm actually doing that max value again of just darkening, so it's taking all the height information below it and it's just doing that clamping effect again, right? So I'm just clamping it down. So I was just preventing it from going over a certain value. So, okay, so that probably wasn't as linear as I thought. All right, so then what I did just to add some depth to it is I added some linear grooves to it. So again, I've just took, in this case, what I did was I took one of those texture maps, so those tileable texture maps that we had, the ones, those stencils, I brought them in, and then I just put them on there and just started tiling them. And so I got this other cool grain pattern. Because I felt like, especially once I started putting on my varnish, I felt like I wasn't getting enough like color information. So you guys, I'm like this is how I like paint, right? It's like I just go crazy with just adding layers and mixing things together, and hope that I understand it later. But what you'll notice here too is here's a area where I just didn't like how it was punching through sometimes, like it was a little too poppy. And then I didn't like it on some of the planks, right? So you got this plank right here where it almost half the plank becomes like this really big shape. I was also noticing some repeating patterns. So what I did was on this one, so I was hand painting, but on this one right here, you can see I was just knocking out some of those planks by just going in here, grabbing the polygon fill, and object fill, and then just filling it with black. And some of them are combined together, so I think I had to end up using UV tile fill. So yeah, and so that was just filling that completely with black and letting me knock out certain planks I just didn't like. And sometimes looking at my mask, sometimes I'm coming back out here and looking. Cool. All right, the next thing I did is, this was actually to grab all of my height information, because what I ended up doing, if we take a look at the combined height, right? There's a lot of different layers that work here, and it was a little too much to go back and like grab all of them and do stuff with them, right? So I'm not using this right away, but I use this later. I was essentially setting my height channel to pass through, right? So just like I was doing an adjustment layer, right? When we do adjustment layer and we want to adjust everything below it, we create a paint layer, we set it to pass through. Remember, pass through is going to grab all the information below. And what I did is, I'm not actually adjusting this, I just set an anchor point to it. And what that does is, you remember, pass through grabs all the information from the layers below and essentially puts it in here as a reference. And then I actually added an anchor point. So I can grab essentially I'm grabbing all of my height information up until this point and saving it as an anchor point. So I can grab and reference this later. Cool. So the next thing I did was, and a lot of these things I came back down and added them later because I actually added the small fibers pretty early, but you have to reorder and shuffle around your layers sometimes if you don't want them affecting certain things. So on this one, I was just kind of adding more fibrous kind of materials to it, right? So in this one, I just added kind of like this directional scratches to it and just darkening it and adding a little height and adding a little roughness. So it's just giving these kind of like grooves, right? Those little kind of scratchy grooves. I color corrected the whole dang thing because I didn't really like the color it was getting because it was feeling a little too muted. Oh, sorry. I always keep doing the wrong one. So I added a little color back into it. Okay, the next thing I did was this is something that actually I learned from watching Jeff's video is adding some more color variation between my planks because when you look at a lot of references for none of these are going to be great examples, but here's one. And also, one of the things I referenced in that video or in the resources is if you can't so sometimes these websites don't let you save the image. In this case, it does. But some of them don't let you save an image. I downloaded this thing called Image Downloader, Imagi, and what it does is it goes through the whole website and then it turns images that are embedded in the website into downloadable links. So it's pretty handy. But something that you guys will notice is one thing that makes wood planks feel believable is variation between each plank, right? Like each plank is being cut at a different time from a different part of the tree, and they're being kind of shuffled around and stored, right? So you're not going to have all the planks, unless you do this ahead of time, all the planks that were cut from the same exact area, you're not going to receive those. Usually you're going to receive essentially a random grouping of planks, right? So you'll see how dark this one is compared to this one. This one's much lighter. And what we could do too is we could put different grain shapes on these, right? Because you can see this one has very different grain shapes than this other one, right? It's all from ostensibly the same tree, but it's just from very different parts of the tree itself. All right, so that's what we're going to do here is because a lot of these are a little too uniform. So what we're doing here is I just, again, did another, let's go back to base color. Turn this into a pass-through layer, and I'm just doing a hue saturation. So this is another way we could do a color overlay. I could put yellow in it and just set the blending mode to tint or something like that. But in this case, we're just shifting the hue of the colors below it a little bit, and we're shifting the saturation, right? So we're just punching the colors. And then in this case, I was pushing the values a little lighter. And you can see a little bit goes a long way. And for the mask, we could do the same thing that we did down below, right? Where we are essentially taking, let me go ahead and turn this off. I have to make everything more complicated than it needs to be. So we can come back in here and we can do grabbing some of these guys, right? Let's say I want to add that one, that one, and that one, right? So you see now those ones are selected. And maybe instead of white on this one, I might do just some dark gray, right? Maybe a little bit on this one, right? So that's a way that you can essentially select random quote unquote, some of these planks to do that. I had a more procedural method for doing it, or I was trying to figure out a more procedural method, but I'm not going to go through it too much. But what I ended up doing was using anisotropic noise, changing its shape and scaling it until it lined up with my planks. It's kind of a crazy way to do it. And the nice thing about anisotropic noise is each band has a slightly different grayscale value. Then I was excluding areas I definitely didn't want it. Then I was increasing contrast, and then I was adding some planks. So anyways, oh no, that's the one we just made. So anyways, you can do it that way, which is kind of stupid, but you can do it this way, which is a lot easier. So here's some lighter planks, and we do the same thing with this one, but it's darker, right? In this case, for this HSL, we're just bringing the saturation down and the lightness down a little bit so we can get some darker wood planks. So it gives us a lot of much more variation in our wood than before. Cool. All right. This one is where we're going to introduce a completely new feature that we haven't touched before. But one thing that I was noticing in some of my references, let's see if I can find a good one. Let's see if we can look at this one. So here's an example of what I was talking about. So we're just going to do, you just click on that button, it'll go through it, and then I can just grab that image right there and download it. So because this is one of those sites where you can't save the image. You can say save as, but it's going to save the website. So let's go here. All right. So this is not as high quality as I thought it was going to be. One of the things, I have another references that are better, but one of the things is when you'll notice with iron or metal that is like attached or part of the wood over time is through moisture, a lot like those rust drippings, is you're getting this like moisture effect from a lot of where those pieces are, right? You can see where each of those iron bolts are, a lot of them are giving you this like kind of shape right there. And if you look down here, right, you see this, it kind of follows the wood grain, which makes sense, right? Like a wood tree, a tree is like fibrous, right? Like it has a bunch of fibers. And so it absorbs and, like translates, I don't know what the word is, water to different parts of the tree, right? And so in a lot of ways, a wood plank, if you like kind of like a piece of paper, right? If you dipped it, like touched ink to it, you'll see it like spread along lines and fibers, right? So you'll see it kind of has a shaping to it as well. So I had a reference where it was more noticeable on the bands because I had bands instead of little bolts, a lot like this door right here. And so then what I ended up doing, and we'll see the effect first, and then we'll go into how we made it, is I went in and I just kind of actually hand painted this. You could use like an ambient occlusion, but the problem is my ambient occlusion map is including my other planks, right? I only want the ambient occlusion effect of the metals casting a shadow. So what I ended up doing, and this one was one where I had to sit and think about it for a second. I was like, hey, how would I do this? And you can see this gets a little complex, but we'll go through this really quickly. So I started, we'll go through the easier way. I started with a harder way. I just left them both in here. First thing I did was I added in, so let's see, let's take a look at this mask. So I grabbed the mask editor. I just wanted to grab the ambient occlusion, right? Which includes, if we just isolate and look at this map, you can see because I baked those metal pieces with my wood, right? They left behind like a cast shadow in the ambient occlusion channel. So you can see, even though those objects aren't visible, right? You can see the shadow they left behind, right? The ambient occlusion. Actually, that's also from the shadows that's being cast, which is really silly. But anyways, so then what I did was, then I would just broke it up a little bit, right? Just adding some dirt. I add this paint in later, but we'll worry about that in a second. And then what I did was I warped it with a directional warp. And this was what I was doing at first. And I was like, this is actually giving me some pretty cool results. And I do still stand by it. But so we talked about the other day, is like, how the hell do you get a directional warp to work? And the key is you just need to push the intensity past 1, right? So I just did directional warp. I did it in a 90-degree direction. And you can see as I push it, it like starts spreading in a specific direction. I don't like it down here, obviously, but I like what it's doing up here, right? And so I get this pattern, and I could do something like blur directional instead of warp directional, blur directional, and then you get this kind of like, softer pattern. So essentially what I did was ambient occlusion. So we'll take a look at this ambient occlusion, broke it up a little bit so it's less uniform. We did a directional warp with a strong value, and then we blur directional to get like more of this kind of stripy pattern instead of like a weird funky pattern that I got. And then this is the new technique. So what I did was I went ahead and added a new paint layer. I'm going to do screen. So let's go to screen, or you guys could just do linear dodge add. I don't know why I always want to do screen. Okay. And then what I did was I used a particle effect brush. So I don't know if you guys have used these before, but these are pretty cool. So you'll usually see them with these little dot patterns on here. And that usually means that it's doing something a little bit more complex, right? Some of them are doing like spraying particles. Some of them are doing things like they're attaching or stitching together like alphas in a unique way. But I came up here to leaks right here. And I pray to God that this laptop can handle this because it is a little heavier. And then what I did was I just went in here and I turned this to white, and let's make sure we're painting. Double click on this. All right. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crank this up a little bit, and you can see, okay, that's way too much. Let's go ahead and bring it up here. So you can see, oh God, that's so much. I don't know why I got an accent all of a sudden. Let's go to 2 and let's bring the, okay, there we go. So as I do this, you can see that it's starting to like essentially create this drip pattern, right? And that's how I was making, if we turn off the warp stuff, so let's just turn off all that stuff. This is all from the particle brush, right? So you can see I'm just kind of getting this downward dripping effect. So there's a lot of particle brushes in there, and they can give you these really cool effects. In this case, this is a flat object, so it's really easy, but you can do it on curved objects too. And what it'll do is it'll actually like follow the form and simulate a little bit on it. So I was just adding that with for these ones, right? So I just kind of painted them to enhance what I already had, right? Let's not worry about this one. So I was just enhancing what I was already getting from below. So just adding those in. I should have added them a little less up here, but whatever. And then the thing I was noticing on a lot of my examples is it wasn't just doing that in the down direction, it was also doing the up direction. So after doing it, I was like, I want to do that again. How do I do it in the up direction, right? And so if we come over here to upwards, you can see I did do it up direction. But what I did was I just added another paint layer. We're going to go ahead and set it to screen. And then on this leaks brush, if we come down here, there's like physics properties on it. Let's make sure we're getting that one. So down here, this is going to be, I think that's like rate of how much it's doing it over time, stamping over time. You can change the spawn rate if you want to spawn more of them, how much it spreads. But what I did here was actually turn gravity off, and I turned global wind Y up to 1, right? Y is the upward direction. So now you can see that particle is going upwards, like reverse gravity pretty much. And so what I was just doing was I was just coming over here and just like, kind of slowly building this up over time. I don't know why let's change this down a little bit. So I was building up over time with like a lower, what's it called? Flow opacity. You can see over here, the shapes are a lot softer. It's kind of hard to tell. Over here, they feel a lot harder. That's just because over here I'm using a lower flow. So I was just doing that to kind of build that shape up too. So anyways, very cool stuff. Let's go ahead and add that one on. I added a layer just to remove it from certain areas. So I removed it from down there, right? Because that initial one was giving this weird kind of, because it's based on UVs, warping it in a weird direction. So I just removed those. And then what I was doing was I was noticing on some of my doors that effect was much larger. So you can see like it's happening on the metal pieces, but it also has like this kind of like bigger moisture effect, and it's a little irregular, which I really liked. So I came in here and I went ahead and painted in with some brushes and using the particle brush so I can get a little bit of irregularity. Cool. Does that make sense? Okay. All I did on this one in terms of material is I just set it to a funky color to darken it. So it gets like a little bit of a grimy color. It has height, but it really doesn't need height. And then I just made it more rough, right? I could dial that back if I wanted to, but I just wanted to feel more rough there. Cool. All right. Next thing I did was my wood grain. I actually add this later. I came back down and added it. But again, I did a pass-through layer just to sharpen my details. So my details get a little bit crispier. Nope, not that one. So just to enhance it, because especially under the layers I'm going to add, that was kind of getting a little too soft and fuzzy. So let's go. There we go. All right. I was talking about cracking earlier, and I did do it earlier, but I pushed them above stuff. That happens, like you'll start adding layers and you want to add new details, but you don't always put them on top, right? You have to think about how layers interact, right? Because I was doing a lot of adjustment layers, and I didn't want, for instance, the adjustment layers to be affecting like some features I was adding. And one of the things I was doing was I added the dirt. So I have a bunch of dust and dirt stuff up here. I didn't want those to be getting affected by wood grain. I didn't want them to be affected by color correction. I wanted them to sit on top. So I had to actually grab all those and put them at the very top. So you have to go around and jump around and play around with it a bit. So these layers are pretty simple, but I just want to add some like cracking along the length of the wood, right? So all I'm really doing here is I just got this node. Is that your? Okay, that's okay. So I got this directional scratches, right? So I just grabbed this. It's just one of the texture maps I found here, directional scratches. I went ahead and blurred them to get like a little bit of a softer gradient on them, because if you guys look at them, it's kind of hard to tell with all this information on top. But here's the shapes, right? So they usually, blur directional, like it's kind of a sharp shape. It doesn't have a lot of fall off on it. So I did blur directional, so it has like a longer crack fall off. Then I just warped it a little bit, little blur slope just to break up the edges a bit. Did another little warp to make them wiggly. And so that gave me my deeper cracks. And then the next thing I did was I did another one. And so this one's just much more infrequent, larger. And I was just going ahead and doing deeper ones. And both of these are just doing a little bit of color. They're pushing the roughness up. And a little bit of just darkening. So both of them are set to multiply, and so they're just darkening the cracks a little bit. So that just added a little bit more wear to it. Then this was one of the features I felt like it started to make it feel like it's coming together, is I did some general edge enhancement. So we go ahead and turn this on. And so now you can kind of see it starts to pick up a little bit more like life and definition to it. So really what I was noticing was like a lot more between my planks. I was getting kind of like edge softening, and they're like kind of a lot, especially on something that like moves a lot, you would see this. In this case, it kind of emulates a little bit like dust buildup. I was kind of adding this in to just sweeten the image, but kind of the same thing as normal. I went in here. This is one of my favorite smart masks. And here it's called Dust Soft. So I think I did this one, Dust Soft Edges, because it has this really nice texture map attached to it, and it gives you this really broad map. I had to adjust it though because I only wanted the edges. Then I just warbled it a little bit, and then I just used Blur Slope to make it feel like it was kind of chunking into some of the areas, right? So it's kind of breaking up a little bit and didn't feel so uniform. And then I did Edge Damage, which is very similar, but has a sharper contrast and pushes in on the height a little bit. We'll see that. So that's like to make it look like there's like chipping between some of the planks, right? So we're just adding that in. So if we take a look at this one, it's very similar, right? I'm just going ahead and adding, doing a ambient occlusion, right? So I can get those areas in there. I was using, again, one of these maps, so it has a texture attached to it. I was adding another one just because I don't think I was getting enough effect over here. Then again, I just use Blur Slope to break it up a little bit, Blur Slope to add some, crunch to the surface. And then that's what's adding some of these like details that are being worn away, like right here. So you guys can see that right there. Cool. Does it seem like an overwhelming amount of layers so far? Kind of is. So like I did with the height earlier, is I did the same thing. I'm grabbing the color. So I just, again, did a pass-through layer, set an anchor point to, and I set the pass-through layer on color. So it just grabs all the color information below, sets the color. And then this one is super crazy. But you can see down here, this one, I'll call it draft color, just so it's less confusing. So I'm actually referencing that color layer, and let's take a look at this mask. Oops. Really? Okay, I was gonna say that can't be what that mask looks like. So it's a really weird looking mask. So, but it's a mask that's meant to be, and this was one that I actually learned again from one of those resources. So I came over here, he breaks it down. So I won't go into too much detail, but if you guys are interested in this, I recommend it. So let's see, Great Wood Process. So in here down below, he kind of talks about it right about here. So he essentially creates this varnish layer. And so below is like the base of the varnish layer, and above is like the blue areas where he's adding and replacing stuff. So he's kind of creating like a nice organization for this. So if we come in here, everything from like here to here are all just base varnish map out making things. So if we hide those top layers, in this case, I guess I'm not adding anything. So let's just get these down to 1. What is going on? Yeah, but if I'm pressing Alt, I should still be able to see it. Oh, okay, there we go. I think it was just taking a while to calculate. So I was just grabbing the color, using levels to bring it into a range I liked. Again, in this case, I was using gradient, but I could just use a levels node, who cares? Then I was just breaking it up a little bit so it's less regular, right? Adding a little warp. I probably could have toned down the warp a little bit. So this is going to be my varnish layer. So everywhere is going to be white is actually where the varnish is showing up. In my case, I wanted all my cavities to have varnish in them, right? Because those are going to be protected areas. So I just kind of grabbed like one of these smart masks that are ambient occlusion based, right? Because a protected area is probably going to have most of its varnish still there. And then what I was doing was, in this case, okay, I only did it on the add sub. I think I did a little bit on the fill cavity down here. Okay. So these 3 layers are just for artistic control, right? So you'll see this one right here, fill cavity. If I came down here and set it to, let's do that fill, we're going to do fill polygons, polygon fill, and I set it to white, right? You can see it does a full varnish, right? So what it does is the varnish is essentially going to deepen the color, right? It's going to make it feel like it's, so we take a look at this layer. It's going to give it like this kind of orange saturated color. it's going to actually set the height. If I go look at the height, so normally, right, what is a height channel usually set to? Linear dodge. What does linear dodge do? So it works with the information below, just adds to it. So I set it to normal, which is what did I do? And I set it to normal, the height on this varnish, so that it just overrides all the information below. So if I came in here and we turn on select mesh, and let's go ahead and again fill that in. White. Man, this thing does not want to update. Come on. I am doing something it doesn't. Okay, weird. Huh. Something is off. Oh, yeah, done. Sorry, I was on the wrong one. All right. So here we go. Sorry. So if I'm just like filling these completely with white, you can see there's still some information that's being removed, but you can see all the height information is being overrun or overridden. So all the height information that's coming from below is being overrun, which would represent or give the illusion, much like with like when we were talking about pottery and glazes and clear coats, it kind of gives the illusion that there's like a thick layer on top that's smoothed down, so it's overriding the wood grain. Okay, so I have this base layer, right? That's this varnish layer. And so I have these different paint layers. So this one right here for add sub is just so I can paint with a soft brush, right? If I want to change some of the varnish settings. So if I come over here, set that to that, bring flow to something, and then just bring this brush up. So if I wanted to add some varnish, right? Let's bring this up a little bit higher, right? So if I'm, feels like I'm not doing anything here. Okay, I am doing things. The flow is so low, I guess. All right, let's go. Oh, I'm set it to 25%. Okay, there we go. So if that's why, sorry. So I can like add and remove varnish, right? To different areas, right? So you'll see as I add varnish up, like the grain below is being hidden below and the color's changing, right? If I do this without that, you can see the color is a little less saturated. I could have enhanced the color a little bit more. But anyways, so that's just for painting it. Fill cavity is just for an area where I want to completely remove or completely add it. And then this one right here, this select mesh is just if you want to completely remove it from something that isn't supposed to have it. So like I said, if you guys are interested in this, come check out this tutorial. You'll understand it a lot better if you like walk through it. So anyways, I made this varnish layer. I had another one right here, which is varnish override, which was an example that was like a little bit more intense, I think it was. There we go. No, actually, I don't remember why I did that. So let's delete it. So anyways, so our varnish, add it on top. So you can see with this varnish, a lot of those details get blurred away. And that's why I was enhancing a lot of my details down below, is I was going back down to those lower layers and just like pushing the details a little bit more because, you know, as I added more layers on top, some of the information down there got lost. I wish I went further on this, but I didn't have enough time. But right around here, this door handle, I would do the same thing on the metal, is I'd make this metal like scratched or worn here, because that's where it's going to turn and scratch against another metal. So it's going to keep polishing. Same thing with on the wood, right? It's going to be kind of hitting the wood right there. So I essentially just made this little pattern right there to make it look like it's, you know, it's kind of it's been scratching over time. So all I did on that one was I just found this coffee circle shape. You can see that one right there. It's just a pattern I found in there that was circular. I changed the shape up a bit. I painted off this area up here because I wanted it to be down here because it's not going to touch up there. You know, classic blur slope just to break it up a little bit. And then I added in this kind of like alpha to have this other scratchy pattern. So that's just to make it look like, you know, that area has been used a lot or interacted with a lot. I added like a hand grime area, right? So, and this is something that I wish, again, I had spent more time doing, is spending more time thinking about the areas that are getting worn, right? So like this area down here is the area that's much more likely to get worn and have a lot more damage. I did do it a little bit up here, but this area up here, it's too perfect, right? You know, it's way too regular. But this area up here should be a lot less worn, right? Because it's not interacting. It's got protection from the elements a lot more. So you do want to have like a gradient more or less to where it's being used. So that's what I did with this hand grime is like, you guys probably have this on your doors at home, right? Every single time you close your door, right? Unless you guys wash your door, you have like that gross hand grime like your steering wheel has. Then I added some scratches. So I just went ahead and did an overall scratch. I kept it pretty low key, but you know, I could have gone further. Let's turn it off. You can see a couple scratches showing up. Then I had like a protected areas section up here. Before I did the varnish, I kind of did this to keep this area up here a little bit more distinct from the areas down below. But you can see with my varnish layer, that kind of started doubling up a little bit. But if we look at this mask, you can see I was combining some masks and doing like a position gradient to grab just that protected area up there so I can protect a little bit better. All right, here's a really big change. I was looking at a lot of these references and you guys probably saw it, but we got this kind of ground moisture effect coming up. And in some cases, right, it's like completely desaturating and coloring that wood, right? You guys can see in this case, it kind of gets mildewy and moldy. Some of them kind of get black, or some of them just get like completely gray. So that's just from moisture over time, just sapping away a lot of the pigment and drying the wood out. So what I did here was I just did this ground up kind of moisture effect right here. And all it is I'm just grabbing, I was doing a position, right? Position gradient. And then what I did was I, just kind of painted it to make it a little more irregular, right? So it was less perfect. I did a big warp on it, which, mixed results. And then I added like a little bit of texture breakup. So it kind of felt like the fibers were affecting it. And then I added ambient occlusion. So some of the cavity areas felt like they were less affected. And all I did really was just change the color and the roughness. So on the color, I just gave it like a gray color and cranked up the roughness. And so it gave me that kind of like ground up effect. All right, reaching the end. So the last things I did was I did some dust and essentially dust and dirt catching stuff. So first thing I did was I went ahead and in here, I dialed it back, but I was grabbing the edges of some of my grain. So you guys can see down here, I have this like levels or high pass filter. If I turn all this stuff down, right? I was grabbing my grain, my wood grain pattern that was down below you. I mentioned this earlier, and this is where I'm actually ending up using it is all the way down here, height grab. I was using this height grab channel right here, and you can see the effect it's having. So I could do this, and I actually ended up like kind of like dialing it back a little bit, but I wanted to grab the edges because I was noticing in some of my references that like dirt and dust was catching on the edges of like raised grain areas. So, and then I just did a high pass and then a levels node. So in this case, I like really cranked it, but let's see. If I did something like this, we would be able to see it a lot better. So you can see it's catching the edges of those grain, but I didn't like the effect for mine. It was just a little too intense. And so what I was also adding was I was just adding some dirt dust breakup. I usually do 2 or 3 layers and just change the blending mode a little bit. So just over time, like grit, dirt stuff on there, and I would even bring it down a little bit more. In this case, I would push a little bit more color into it probably, but we're just kind of leaving it like that, getting a little bit rougher. Then I wanted to get some dirt buildup on top surfaces. So I was just essentially doing an ambient occlusion effect. So you can see, let's see down there. So you guys can see it primarily down there. And again, similar for having to hand paint those darker areas, I had to hand paint the dust along the top of these guys, right? So I was just kind of building up this like dust of, again, just using a soft brush and painting on top of those. So I'd get like this kind of effect right here. And just doing a blur slope to break up the shape. And very last, and this is kind of helps with this up here, is I went ahead and did a little bit of roughness breakup. I could probably add another layer of it, but we just added some roughness breakup that did screen. So it's just roughening up the surface. So this is really chaotic. It's very grimy. There's a lot of information in it. And there's a lot of things I already want to change about it, but this is essentially the approach that I took to doing this wood. Looking at a lot of my references at these kind of details and looking at a lot of tutorials actually for like different techniques and just trying out new things. Because in this one, I was trying out a lot of new stuff. I mean, I've messed around with particle brushes before, but you know, this is the first time I've actually like used it in a first serious demonstration or project. And then like that varnish workflow and Jeff's workflows, you know, I hadn't done those specific techniques before, so now I have more in my bag. So any questions? I know that was a lot, and it was not as easily and digestible breakdown as I had hoped it would be.
Is this filed in the?
Maybe. That I'm recording this video though, so I can shoot you guys the link afterwards if you guys want to. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, on Thursday, we're going to do feedback. So make sure you guys upload progress for Thursday. Yeah. Mhm. Uh-huh.
What would you do?
That's a broad question, but honestly, what I would do is I would probably look at a good tutorial for making it, just because whenever I'm doing a material that I haven't really done a whole lot of, I usually look at some other resources just to kind of get a good idea of how other people start them. And then a lot of the work, like building the base material, is a really good skill, but a lot of times what we end up doing, a lot of people end up doing is working from a base material. So if you find like a stone based material or you build it from a map or something like that, that's usually giving you a really good starting point. And then it's how you add the details, the context, and how it interacts with the world, just like we did with this wood door, right? I didn't stop at just wood grain, right? I added a bunch of layers that were based on my references to make it feel a little bit more physical and believable. And so, yeah, in this case, I think I ended up, just because it looked weird when it just had gray shaders on it, I ended up doing a preset material, yeah, rock faces. And the only thing I ended up doing, because I didn't have time, was, so I just chose this rock faces material. I played around with the color variation. There it goes. Sorry, I'm getting rid of all the edge detection. So I just added this one. Again, I did that thing with the technical parameters where I changed the height range, changed it to the thing I liked. And just like the wood grain, eventually, as I would go, I'd probably be covering up like probably 75% of that original layer, but building off of a lot of that information. Like it gives me a lot of good base noise and color variation. It gives me a lot of interesting height stuff I can work with. Ostensibly probably also gives, so color obviously has a ton of great information. Height has awesome information. And then it has like a lot of rich roughness stuff going on there. So it's a lot of really good stuff I can work with and build off of. So yeah, if you find a tutorial that goes through building a base layer, that's always nice too, because then you can come up with, like, if you guys see me doing something like where I take like a texture noise pattern and then I do a bunch of funky filters to it to make funky shapes. A lot of that's just been through learning by building things from the ground up. And also, if you guys learn a little bit of Substance Designer, Substance Designer forces you to understand how to do that kind of stuff. And so I in the short time I've used Substance Designer, it gave me a lot of different ways, digital image processing techniques to like manipulate using different filters and value stuff, which just really broadens your toolbox of how you can get creative. Because like, you know, all the stuff that I do that I'm like, this is really hard to explain, you know, blah, 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 is stuff that, you know, I wrestled with for like a long time and built up over years. You know, they're not easy things to just do out of the box. But yeah, so make sure that you guys upload progress by Thursday. I'd like to see something in Substance Painter, right? I want you guys to have your asset. Should have an initial texturing pass, get as far as you guys can. And then we'll have another feedback session next Thursday. Don't forget that these feedback sessions and those check-ins count against your participation grade. So make sure you guys don't miss those. Yeah.
We also have renders.
If you want to do renders, that's fine. In general, I mean, like if you guys can do good quality Substance Painter viewport settings, that tends to be nice too, right? Like this is pretty decent viewport settings. You guys could do iRay renders as well, which is just that render button right there. If you're going to do it in the viewport, a lot of times what I'll do is you can see I'm doing like shadows. So I just come over here. You don't want to do it while you're actively working if you're on a like crappy laptop, but I usually turn on shadows. In this case, it's a little too much right here. And then, you know, other material settings like subsurface scattering. I also turn on temporal anti-aliasing. So it takes a second, but it's much like anti-aliasing in the viewport of like any other 3D package. It's just going to clean up any of those jackies you guys get from just monitor pixel resolution type stuff. So just, it's not as noticeable on this one, but you can hopefully see it like in some of those straight lines right there. Once like straight and vertical lines start going diagonal, you start to get anti-aliasing. So yeah, and the only other thing, don't do any post-processing stuff because that can be messing up everything. Tone mapping, I don't do anything. Go ahead and start your projects in ACES. Why not? And yeah, that's pretty much it. Subsurface. Yeah, you can do displacement. And in my case, I wasn't doing big enough details to want displacement, but on the metal, you guys can see I have like these dents and scratches. I was starting to play around with the metal a bit more. But if I wanted those to feel a lot more physically plausible, then I could have done displacement on those to really push them in and then like have shadow casting on them. Sorry, I clapped really loud. So yeah, cool. All right. The other thing is next. So by next week, Addie is going to give you guys a scattering tutorial. So remember, part of this project is going to be implementing some kind of sculpting implementation to it, and then also adding some kind of scattering implementation to it. In my case, if I was doing this, I might do like a little bit of a ground and then scatter some rocks and dirt, or do like some cobblestones or something like that, depending on